Alright, this is Unit 3, and the title for this unit is Complex Numbers. And page 23, we're going to put the sheet that I handed out to you, the number system sheet on page 23. And on page 24, we're going to have a review of simplifying radicals. So on page 23, make sure you have a page number and the title is Number Systems. We've already filled in all of the real numbers, and now we've started talking about imaginary numbers. So let's put in some examples for imaginary numbers. So for example, imaginary numbers are numbers like the square root of -7. Okay. We use the symbol I, a cursive I, to represent imaginary numbers. Or a number like the square root of -16 is an imaginary number. Complex numbers have an imaginary part and a real part, which is why this box extends over both the imaginary numbers and the real number systems. An example of a complex number would be 2 plus 3i. So it has a real number 2 and an imaginary number 3i. Okay, or another example would be 4 plus the square root of -2. So that square root -2 is an imaginary number, but the 4 is a real number, so it's both imaginary and real. Okay? All right, so then let's go over to page 24, and we're going to title this page Simplifying Radicals. And this is just going to be a review of square roots and how we simplify square roots. So, examples. If we have something like the square root of 16, we know that the square root of 16, we can break that down into the square root of 4 times the square root of 4. And anytime we have two square roots that have the number under the radical is the same, this simplifies to just a 4. We no longer have the square root. So if we had something like the square root of 8, we could break this down into the square root of 4 times the square root of 2. 4 times 2 equals 8. We can continue to break down 4 as the square root of 2 times the square root of 2. And we need to remember to bring down this square root of 2 that we had above also. So when we have square root of 2 times square root of 2, that gives us 2. We no longer have the square root. And this does not have a partner. This square root 2 does not have a partner, so we simplify that simply by bringing it down. So our final answer is 2 square root 2. Okay. Sometimes we might have larger numbers that we're starting with under the radical. So for example, if we have a number like square root 74, okay, we're going to just start by looking at numbers that we could divide 74 by. So I know that 74 is divisible by 2. So one of our factors is going to be 2. Our other factor is going to be, let's see, 2 goes into 7 3 times and into 14 7 times. So our other factor is 37. 37 is a prime number. Notice that I do not have any duplicates. I don't have another square root 2. I don't have another square root 37. These are both prime numbers. They don't break down any farther. So I don't want to leave it broken apart like that. We should put it back together and realize that the square root of 74 is as simplified as this radical can get. It's as simplified as it can get. So let's try one more example where it will break down. So we could, for example, find the square root of 32. There are lots of different ways that we could break this apart. We could start by knowing that 32 is divisible by 2, so we could have square root 2 times the square root of 16. we've already broken down the square root of 16 and simplified it. We know that it equals 4. So if I want, I can just go ahead and write that as 4. And I know that the square root of 2 does not break down any farther, so we could write that as the square root of 2. If you did not recognize that you could break this into 32 into 16 and 2, we could have gone into 32 is the square root of 4 times the square root of 8. We know that the square root of 4 is 2. And from above, we already did the square root of 8. We found that that simplified into 2 times the square root of 2. Okay. So now we have this 2 times the square root of 2. We can put these 2's together and call that 4 times the square root of 2 is that number simplified. Okay. Let's see, let's do one more. This is going to be our last example, and it's going to be the square root of 125. Okay, so I know that the square root of 125 can break apart into the square root of 5 times the square root of, let's see, 5 goes into 12 2 times, and into 25 5 times. That's the square root of 25 times the square root of 5. And I know that the square root of 25 is 5. And we cannot simplify the square root of 5, so we're going to bring that down, and it becomes the square root of 5. All right, that's it for simplifying round.